Okay, 8th graders, almost high schoolers. We're going to be looking at data, the same data in several ways. You should have this packet out and something to take notes with. And the first way we're going to look at the data here for cell phone usage and a survey of how old people were is a two-way table. So I'd like you to take a look at that information and tell me why do you think this is called a two-way table? And enter your answer on Edpuzzle. It's a two-way table because the table represents two variables. You have the survey talking about their age and a survey about whether or not they have a phone. So you can read that and get two results in two directions. Looking at the table, I'd like you to decide what the 25 means. Hopefully you could see that the 25 means that 25 people who were 10 to 12 years old had a cell phone. And then I'd like you to take a look at the 55. So what does the 55 mean? And the 55 means that 55 people who were surveyed don't have a cell phone. And then I'd like you to answer the question, looking at this table, how many people are represented in the table? And hopefully you got 170 for that. So we're looking at the same survey results, and this time we're looking at a bar graph. So why do you think it's called a bar graph? So it's a bar graph because each bar that you're given represents how many people are named in each group listed at the bottom. So you're looking at each group listed along the bottom, and of course the bars are following along with how many they are along that y-axis. So the next question would be, what do the solid bars on here, it's the blue bars, but they are solid on your paper. What do those represent, and how do you know? And hopefully you realize that the solid bars, the blue bars on here, show how many people have a cell phone, and that is just based on the key provided with any bar graph. So the 25 from the table before, where does that show up in this bar graph? And that 25 was 10 to 12-year-olds who have a cell phone. And so in this bar graph, you're looking at 10 to 12-year-olds who have a cell phone. And you can see that that comes out right across at 25. So another way to read the same information. We have a two-way table and we have a bar graph. So we have another way of looking at the same information, but you're going to see the numbers are a little bit different here. This one is called a segmented bar graph. So again, I'd like you to take a close look at it and decide why you think it's called a segmented bar graph. Hopefully after looking at it, you've realized that segmented means pieces, and so this is a segmented bar graph because each bar is segmented into pieces. And The numbers are a little bit different. You'll see that the labels on the bottom, these are the same with the age groups, and you have the have a cell phone, no cell phone. But the numbers on the side don't quite match up with what you would have seen in the two-way table and in the regular bar graph. And so I need you to kind of think about what that vertical axis, that y-axis, represents. And then I'd like you to tell me what that represents. So the y-axis is the percentage of each section. So because that first bar represents the 10 to 12-year-olds, and we had looked at that solid part as 25 of them. So let's pull that over here. That was 25 10 to 12-year-olds. And if you look on your table, on your paper, the 10 to 12-year-olds was 60 of the people. So that's 25 out of 60. When we do that 25 divided by 60 and you get that decimal value, that comes about out to 0.42, which is approximately 42%. And hopefully you can see that that makes sense for that space there. And so that each bar is the percentage of that section. And that's where they're getting the numbers there for a segmented bar graph. The next thing we're going to take a look at is relative frequency. So we're going back to the two-way table about cell phones and the ages. So looking at it as a two-way table there. And you can see we're taking that 25% and in the table below, the 25, which was 42% from the previous piece, and putting that below into a two-way table that's representing relative frequency. And relative frequency is your percentage out of a total. So we're looking at, so it's like based on a frequency based on 100, it's percent. And so we're looking at, to get that 25 10 to 12-year-olds who have a cell phone out of the 60 10 to 12-year-olds gives you 42%. And so to calculate the rest of them, we want to look at those totals. And we're looking at across. You can see that the row is totaling 100%. So we're looking at counting across. So the next part we do is we would take that 35 10 to 12-year-olds out of 60 10 to 12-year-olds. So we're going to take that and we would say, okay, so there are 35 10 to 12-year-olds out of 60 total 10 to 12-year-olds that were surveyed. And we want to change that to its decimal. So you want to divide top divided by bottom. And you're going to get about 0.58. The next digit is a 3, so we'll just round that down and cut it off there. And so that is about 58%. Now, when you're adding the totals across in the row, if we're using the row total, which we were using the total of 60, which was the total for that row, then our total for the row should be very close to 100. Now, it might come out at like 98 or 102, but it should be very close to 100. The only reason it would come out maybe a little bit below or above is because of rounding. And when we add these, we can see that we have our 42 and 58, and we get exactly that 100%. Okay, and again, that's taking those two and adding them. And I'm going to get the extra lines out of the way here. And let's take a look at the next set of data to finish off that next row. So we can take the 40, 13 to 15-year-olds, and that would be out of 50 total 13 to 15-year-olds. And we want to find that percent or the relative frequency. And so we would say, okay, 40 out of 50, and you do again top divided by bottom to change it to a decimal. That comes out to 0.8, which is equal to 80%. And we're going to do the same thing, again, just working our way across that row. If we have the 10, 13 to 15-year-olds that do not have a cell phone out of the total of 50 13 to 15-year-olds, then we can create that fraction of 10 out of 50. And you do top divided by bottom. That's going to give us 0.2, which is equal to 20%. And so we could say 20% of the 13 to 15-year-olds do not have a cell phone. So your total, again, your total here at the end of a column should be 100%. So I'm going to fill that in at the end of that row. Since we're working across on our row should be that. I'd like you to fill in your, find the relative frequency for me of the 16 to 18-year-olds that have a cell phone. So if you could find the relative frequency for me there and enter that onto Edpuzzle. And hopefully you got about 83%. And again, that's relative frequency. It's going to depend on what we're asking it out of. It's relative because in this case we went across. We were looking at percentages out of each age group. We could also look downward, and that's why it's a two-way table, and then we'd be kind of taking it out of a different total. And we'll practice more on that in the upcoming activities. You want to head back to your nearpod.